federal government has insisted that Nigerians should brace up for an increment in the pump price of petrol. We've heard this before. In light of the current economic situation in the country, the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Chief Temitope Silva, addressed journalists on the sidelines of a graduation and awards ceremony organized by the Offshore Technology Institute, University of Port Harcourt in Rivers State, where 14 master's degree graduates were recognized. Joining us to discuss these headlines further is Omosuyi Temitope, investment strategist with Afrinvest Securities. Omosuyi, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with the labor unions. What do you make of labor's position on minimum wage and the threat to strike in certain states where it's not being implemented?
Thank you for having me, Reuters. It's quite disturbing that this has been the issue over time. Labor union continue to talk about strike, adjusting minimum wage and improving the living standard of their members. Well, a trade union is needed in every society to agitate for improvement in the welfare of employees, but it's a quite challenging environment. I'm talking about Nigeria now. Analysts and economists have continued to argue that we shouldn't begin to look at just minimum wage, but we should look at minimum living wage, because minimum living wage will continue to reflect economic reality. For instance, in the last 10 years, wage has only been increased by 67% from about 18,000 naira to 30,000 naira. And inflation, long-term inflation is about 12%. Inflation had gone up by 120% in the last 10 years. So a 67% increase compared to about 100% increase in inflation, there's still a shortfall of about 37% or 33% thereabout. So basically, the labor union will continue to agitate for increase in minimum wage, but I think we should go the route of increase in minimum living wage. But we know it's quite challenging at this particular time, because looking at what the data from the MBS at last week concerning state fiscal sustainability, more than 34 states cannot even cover their expenses with IGR. I'm repeating that again, more than 34 states, I think 34 states cannot even cover their expenses with IGR. So meaning they will continue to be constrained to meet recurrent expenditure. The same thing goes with the federal government. This year alone, we are looking at about 5.5 or we are looking at over 5 trillion budget deficit, and this will be financed through borrowing, sales of assets, and we are looking at even printing some money, which had happened last year. So all of this constraint will continue to push the fiscal side and even the state government not to comply. But on the other hand, you would say that the agitation of the labor union is justifiable because of increase in cost of living. But in a market where unemployment is very high, labor union and all the association are usually less effective, because you have high excess supply of labor. So what will happen in that kind of environment where you set a price floor, that is, you set a minimum wages, that the people will continue to even demand for wages below what you are agitating for. So I think the basic thing is to begin to look at a holistic way of addressing these shortcomings. Even companies as well, if you want your company to increase what they pay, there's challenges around cost of doing business. Companies are not making enough profit compared to some years ago. It becomes very difficult from the demand side to even comply with the supply side, that is the labor market this time. So this will continue to wane the effectiveness of labor union, especially when you have high unemployment rate at about 33%. We have an effective labor market. We are looking at employment of over 90 million people in the next 3 years to ensure that the unemployment level is reduced to the national unemployment rate. So by and large, I think it's going to be quite a challenge. Why the labor union are always of living of their employees and their members, why they want their conditions to be improved, the work environment and all of that. But we also understand from the fiscal side that it's actually constrained. But the last point I need to mention why the labor union will continue to go out despite the constraint they see around the demand side is because, the payments even across the board from the private sector and the public sector, you see that about 10-15% of people that earn the highest are skewed against the lower cadre. So, labor union will continue to say that, the politicians or the top hierarchy in the political system are actually earning more. So if the resources is equitably distributed, then there won't be any challenges around talking about minimum wage, and the condition of their members will reflect economic reality.
Very in-depth, Omosuyi. Thank you. A very, very extensive explanation there. I quickly, only got a couple minutes to go. I want to quickly combine the Bureau of Public Enterprises seeking investors to take 100% positions in the generation companies, and also the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission, power sector. They're having a 5-year plan for GenCos. I want to get your take on that briefly, if you can.
We know that Nigeria has the highest unelectrified people in the world, and again, government finance its deficit through 3 means: sales of assets, borrowing, and printing of currency. So in addition to the fact that the assets will be sold and the inflow will consolidate government fiscal sustainability, I think it's also a win-win, because the private sector and even consumer will benefit if this is properly done. But I'm sure that investors will be concerned about lingering challenges in the country around regulation, how transparent to the process be, and how profitable it will be, because investors will not just throw money at any opportunity if they see that it's not going to be viable, and there are snags that will impede the profitability, which I've mentioned earlier: regulatory environment, the transparency, which everything is hinged around the Bureau of Public Enterprises, because they are responsible for transmitting of government property to the private sector, that is commercialization and privatization.
Thank you so much. 30 seconds, Timi Priscilla saying that we can't afford subsidy. I know we've heard this again and again, but 30 seconds, what's your quick take before we go?
Subsidy is a symbol of a dysfunctional. We understand the fact that we will continue to get subsidy because we feel that the level of income in Nigeria, or of an average Nigeria, cannot afford basic amenities, especially PMS. And I always tell people that we don't drink oil. Oil is a complementary demand or derived demand. If there's stable electricity, if there's an efficient transport system, you don't need, or you wouldn't forget that. But fuel is demanded because of some services. So if those services are provided, no Nigerian will be concerned about increase in fuel price. So each time we talk about agitation against fuel price adjustment, upward adjustment, is about the impact it will have on inflation, transport, and other components of inflation. So no one is really looking at the PMS price, but how it will affect the last man on the street.
Excellent stuff. Omosuyi Temitope, investment strategist at Afrinvest Securities. Thank you so much for giving us your thoughts on labor, workers' day, power, and fuel subsidies. We appreciate you.